Anglo-American establishment. What is the special relationship between the USA and Britain? How did the United States of America become the most powerful nation with the ability to exert force and influence globally? To answer these questions, we need to go back to the late 1800s with Cecil Rhodes and his dream of expanding the British Empire, returning to the days when North America was still under rule and regaining all the former colonies. Believing the British model of society and rule to be the most advanced in human history, and of course being Darwinists, the inner core of Rhodes' group of elites saw it almost as their duty to impose this on the rest of the world. The world is made up of power blocks. This is the natural path of human hierarchy and the creation of power structures. As mentioned in a previous video on the nature of the state, expansion is the natural objective of any power structure. Man always wants more, so an easy way to predict the behavior of a state, a kingdom, or an empire is to look at the desires of the individual. Some are more expansionist than others, so there are degrees, hence the success of some over others. However, this also depends on the moral foundations of a people and their willingness to go against, adhere to, or outright ignore in the name of material gain and status. Since 1945, Britain and the USA have forged an alliance and have effectively eliminated most opposition, leaving them as the global hegemon. This is comprised of Great Britain, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, the USA, and Israel, also known as the Atlanticists. This dates back to 1891 with Cecil Rhodes and his inner circle of the Round Table Movement and Milner's Kindergarten, which were established as secret think tanks for influential imperialists and industrialists to exert power and control over the British government and to expand the empire and rein in former colonies, especially the USA, for the purpose of controlling the world. At this time, there were three competing power blocks to the British Empire, that being the Central Powers of Germany, Austria-Hungary, and the Ottomans, Russia, and Japan. Britain and Japan were in a formal alliance, but the other two were seen as a threat, especially the Central Powers and their domination over Europe, in particular Germany, which was quietly building an empire with significant colonies in Africa, the South Pacific, and the Far East. Not to mention its rapidly growing navy, which saw the construction of many new warships for the purpose of rivaling the Royal Navy, much to Britain's alarm, as its powerful industry steamed ahead of Britain. The 20th century saw the last major power blocks fight it out in a final battle that would leave only two remaining, both of which were internationalist in nature and essentially the result of Freemasonry and the destruction of the traditional order of monarchy and divorce of church and state. So one could say they were two sides of the same globalist coin, albeit at a governmental level and certainly in the eyes of the public, very much in opposition and seen as the antithesis to each other's ideologies. But in reality, they were simply at opposite ends of the same train carriage, traveling in the same direction, that is, towards materialism and away from spirituality. This great conflict fought in two parts, known as World War I and World War II, in which the latter resulted in the elimination of two of these four power blocks, as Britain turned on Japan, built up and industrialized the Soviet Union, and then goaded Germany into invading Poland, effectively engineering the war with the intention of finishing off Germany and weakening or destroying Russia. The only way this could be done was to maneuver Germany and Russia into fighting each other, as Britain was not powerful enough, even with a fully committed USA, to defeat either of these two powers. The only realistic option was to form an alliance with one or the other, and with Germany being positioned between Britain and Russia, and as the strongest of the two, it was only logical to make Germany the enemy. At the same time, Britain needed to pull the United States, which had a strong policy of neutrality, out of isolationism and into the Atlanticist power bloc, if they were going to have any chance at defeating the Central Powers. The goal has always been to dominate the world, so it was inevitable that at least one world war would result from this. War is nothing new, but it was always localized prior to the Industrial Revolution. Sure, you had the European powers colonizing the world since the late 1400s. However, they lacked the ability to take on all other powers at once, let alone conquer them, for the simple fact that speed locomotion had not yet been developed. Napoleon was possibly the first to attempt this, but as successful as he was, the combined forces of all the other great powers put an end to his conquests, albeit the Napoleonic Wars were still restricted to the European continent, with a few exceptions. Britain, up until recently, has always been a master of diplomacy, and used this to forge alliances, subvert, deceive, and maneuver foreign states to its agenda. Britain needed to perfect this ability, as it's always been a naval power, and never a land power strong enough, on its own, to go up against rivals such as France, Germany, Japan, and Russia. This was evident when Britain lost to the American revolutionaries, when there was no support from elsewhere. Britain has always been part of a coalition when involved in major conflicts, from the Napoleonic Wars to World War II, and even then it suffered defeats. World War II exposed Britain's weakness in standing alone, as it lost all land battles with both Germany and Japan in the early years prior to the USA joining. Being an island is really the only thing that saved Britain. Having said all this, even using brute force to destroy or conquer nations is not enough to control the entire planet. This is where soft power comes in. If you can get a country to ruin itself from within, then all you need to do is plant a few seeds of destruction, or poison the well, so to speak, in the form of revolutionaries. Once a country becomes decadent, it doesn't require conquering by force. It will simply eat itself. This is how the Atlanticists have perfected their method of subversion, both on foreign and on their own domestic populations. The promotion of liberalism has been their main tool. Capital is needed, however, to do this effectively, and with the British Empire controlling such vast territories, rich in natural resources, has been able to accumulate vast quantities of wealth, which is then used to finance all their proxy wars and revolutions wherever needed. After World War II, the ruling elite, having seen the vulnerability of Britain to Germany, decided to relocate its center of power to the USA due to its geopolitical location, separated by two vast oceans to the east and west, a vassal to the north and a poor neighbor to the south. The USA is impregnable to any potential enemies, no matter how strong, in addition to having the world's most powerful navy, replacing Britain as the ruler of the seas during World War II, and taking on the role as leader of the Atlanticists, and becoming world police. The USA essentially took the relay stick from Britain as Bill Donovan and British intelligence formed the CIA, which was modeled on the Special Operations Executive, or SOE, and MI6. Britain had to step aside and assume the role of a secondary power, but still within the bloc. United by common language, the Anglosphere essentially controls, or has a heavy lean on Western Eurasia, Latin America, Africa, the Middle East, and much of South Asia. Only the northern and eastern parts of the Eurasian landmass and a few isolated nations have remained truly independent. That is, until very recently, as current events are reshaping the geopolitical landscape and a new multipolar world emerges, leaving the Atlanticist Imperium and its New World Order, which had almost completed its conquest of the planet, behind.